Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the show. My name is Paul Brown, and this evening my guest will be Ms. Jennifer Roberts, the chairman of the Board of County Commissioners. How you doing there, Ms. Roberts?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me on again.
Welcome back to the show. I really appreciate you coming back to the show, educating our audience. Okay, let's get back and start talking about the debt crisis that we recently were going through. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm a little disappointed with Washington right now. I think that our Congress pushed us to the brink of a financial crisis without it being necessary. I think there was a lot of posturing, there was a lot of politics, and I'm not sure that the people who were refusing to raise the debt ceiling really understand the way international financial markets work.
Correct.
And when you say that the U.S. government is no longer going to stand behind the full faith and credit of the debt obligations that it issues, when you say it is not going to fulfill those credits that it has obligated itself to, when you don't raise that debt ceiling, you send ripples across the globe. And we came within a few hours
Correct.
of actually reaching that debt ceiling and having that happen and having the rating agencies downgrade the full faith and credit of the United States government. And so I'm not sure that people in Congress understand this is a transitional time. And do they really want the U.S. to step back and say, we're not going to be #1 in the world anymore? Do they really want us to not compete? Do they really understand all the repercussions of that? And, you know, here domestically, you know, folks who are in the military, folks who are on Medicare or Medicaid, folks who are getting pensions, all of those folks were concerned that they were going to end up facing, you know, a big blank wall on Tuesday. And thank goodness there was a compromise at the last minute. Still some details we worked out. There's going to be a committee that's going to be meeting to look at more specifics on what happened. Thank goodness it went, the deal extends to 2013, so it's not going to be one campaign issue in 2012 and not going to distract our president as he tries to run for re-election and be something else that people are campaigning all about. Thank goodness. But there are a lot of things that haven't been addressed. Loopholes in the tax code, all the tax cuts for the wealthiest taxpayers that continue to drain our economy, defense spending. I mean, there's so many things that still need to be addressed. And again, it shows the breadth of government services that we have right now. And it also shows the interconnection of our financial system with the rest of the world.
Correct.
And there were lots of people who were watching us. I was actually in Europe this summer for a few weeks, reading the International Herald Tribune and reading about the European debt crisis and the U.S. debt crisis.
Right.
And both are frightening, and they're connected. And what we all need to do is to work to grow out of this recession and to focus on the things that are important, to be efficient where we can, and also to make sure that we're not neglecting parts of the system to favor others who happen to have a greater voice because they have greater wealth.
So how are we looking like as far as the economy in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County?
Well, we are actually seeing a little uptick in unemployment. You know, it's one of these, it's a real mixed bag right now because we've had great job announcements recently.
Correct. We've
had some call centers, we've had some globally recognized names agree to either move headquarters here or to grow here, expand here. We've had quite a few that have happened last, you know, over the summer. But at the same time, we've seen an uptick in unemployment. And there are still sectors that are struggling. There's still that struggle of transition as we transition away from the financial services to the concentrated amount that we had. We still have quite a bit of that, but we're growing others like the energy sector, the healthcare sector, and those sorts of things. The other thing that was part of the recent uptick across the state was the loss of public sector jobs.
Okay.
And so as local governments and state governments around this country are contracting, are finding that their revenues are down, so they have to lay people off, teachers, inspectors, you know, all kinds of people that are paid for by the government, that leads to higher unemployment as well.
So where do you see us going as far as for the future, how can we as citizens help to make this, the situation? I mean, as far as voting more or getting involved more, or what do you feel that we as the community needs to do?
Well, I think that people do need to make themselves heard, and a lot of issues are very complex, but there are some basic ones that people can weigh in on. And in fact, to, I think, the credit of the American people, all of the congressional leaders saw their many switchboards went down as the debt ceiling was being negotiated.
Correct.
Because so many people did weigh in, thank goodness, and the email servers went down because they weren't prepared for the volume. And what that means is that the American people were watching.
Correct.
And they were listening, and they were paying attention. And I think, in a democracy, as long as we have a good educational system and a good educational foundation, which we work very hard on in this state, specifically in Mecklenburg County, we need to give credit to the voters. We need to give credit to people who do understand the basics of what a debt ceiling is, of what public spending is, of the essential government services. If there's fat in the budget, where it is. A lot of people can make pretty good decisions on that. And so they did weigh in, and I think what they need to do in the future is continue to weigh in on that. Continue to help Congress focus on jobs, on supporting job creation, on workforce development, on training workers for a new 21st century economy.
Correct. Because
there are a number of industries that are no longer pertinent, but there are a number that are coming online. The solar panel industry, for example, continues to grow in this state, continues to grow across this country. Those kinds of things, the average American can make their voice heard and can say, quit playing politics, quit waiting until the last minute to negotiate, don't make compromise a dirty word, which is something that it has become. And, there was an era in U.S. politics when the Democrats and Republicans used to really sit down together, and that compromise was actually a good thing.
Correct.
And I think we need to remind them that that can be a positive way forward.
Because it has a major effect on everyone that's in this country. And I think, just like you said, we went very close to the end, and it may have affected a lot of people. And maybe we're not as educated as we are as far as the impact that it would have created. Just give us some situation of how it might have affected me.
Well, and I would argue real quick, just following the last point, that nobody really gained.
Correct.
In the end of that negotiation, and all the posturing and saying I'm not going to change, and the Tea Party saying no more taxes and no more increase in spending and all that. I think we all lost just a little bit. And how could it affect you? There are so many government programs that people are a part of that they don't even think about every day. One that's actually been discussed recently is the mortgage interest deduction.
Okay.
So now you can take that off your taxes. It helps you buy a house. There's talk about maybe we should change the rules for that because people can do it for multiple houses.
Correct.
Maybe we need to change that. But if you're financed through any kind of government securities, government debt, whatever, your mortgage would be directly impacted if we had gone into default. If we had not raised the debt ceiling, you could have had your mortgage payments change. If you are a military person, either getting a retirement check or an active duty check, that would have been impacted. The government's ability to borrow would have been impacted. So if you can't make your government payroll, are you going to furlough employees? There could have been
Correct.
a lot of government employees who have been furloughed. What if you're on Medicare, which is actually a very efficient delivery of health care? It's a government program. Would there be people who couldn't go to the doctor? Because, doctors are getting to the point where unless you show you have payment, they can actually turn you down for a visit. Now, if you're emergency room, they have to take you, but
Correct.
if it's a doctor's office, they can turn you down. So again, if the government can't borrow, maybe you can't go see your doctor if you're on Medicare or Medicaid. And that's just a few examples of so many different things that would be impacting everyone's daily life right here. Not to mention what happens to your stock portfolio, to the bonds and the treasury bills that you hold, when the government gets downgraded from a AAA to, a single A or whatever Moody's would have made it. how that impacts your investments, how that impacts other investments, how it impacts the strength of the dollar against other currencies, how it impacts international financial flows, and that all works back into imports, exports, and the health of our companies here.
So where do we go at next? What's the next process? I know we've gotten that issue, the debts, out of the situation for now, but what's the next thing that's going to possibly be an agenda that you see?
Well, if you're talking, I don't know if you're talking locally or nationally.
Well, let's talk locally. Locally now. Let's go.
Okay, let's go locally. Well, one of the things that Mecklenburg County is working on right now that we haven't been able to do for 2 years is that we are actually going to issue some debt.
Oh, okay.
This another way it would impact it. If the U.S. government had defaulted, we wouldn't be able to issue this debt. The markets would not have purchased municipal government debt, even state government debt. Even during the recession, there were some infrastructure programs that had to be delayed because the governments couldn't sell the bonds because the market was afraid of government debt. So if we defaulted, Mecklenburg County would not be able to do what we're about to do, and that is we're about to issue $100 million of debt because we have projects that have been waiting for years,
Okay.
parks, recreation centers, greenways, schools. We have not had any school construction bond money for the last 2 years.
Okay.
We have done some funding through operating funds of HVAC replacements, roof repair. I mean, we've been able to do some capital projects on a small scale, but we haven't had any major renovation work done or any school construction for 2 years. So we're going to actually issue debt this summer to help start that again, and we'll be building some schools. Actually, the first year just renovating.
Okay.
Second year we'll have some actually new schools.
That's great.
Because of the overcrowding and the way that things are happening in the school system. Parks that have been waiting for, people have been waiting for years to get. Give you a good example, one that we're going to break ground on later this month, Romeo Bearden Park.
Oh, okay.
Which is in the 3rd Ward in the Uptown area. It's bordered by, let's see, is that Church Street and Martin Luther King and 3rd Street and Mint. And that has been a project that's been on the books for about 10 years. It's part of the bonds that were voted on in 2007, the park bonds. And the residents of 3rd Ward have been asking for a park for quite a while. That one's been put on hold. It's also the 100th anniversary of Romeo Bearden's birth.
Oh.
So there's going to be a big groundbreaking in their exhibits this year, Romeo Bearden's work, and he spent time in Charlotte. So that's going to be one project that will move forward.
Correct. Let's go into homelessness in our community. I think that seems to be a big issue that we have, homelessness. What do you think about that, and what can we do to improve that situation?
Well, what we did actually last year for the first time was the city and the county had a 10-year plan to end homelessness. But we had never tasked somebody to be responsible to pursue that plan and to go through the recommendations and try to make progress on it. We announced it to the public. We said we want to end homelessness. Here's the 10-year plan. But we never made anybody responsible for actually pursuing that plan.
Okay.
What we created this past year was an interagency, intergovernmental steering committee for the 10-year plan to end homelessness. And that group has been meeting actively over the last year, and what they're supposed to do is go through the plan and say, how do we make this happen? How do we make the second thing happen? How do we make the third thing happen? Who is responsible? Where are the resources? And how can we make progress? And they have been meeting to work on that. They're trying to coordinate a lot of different efforts, and there's been some great strides.
Correct.
We've had some nonprofits that have merged. The Uptown Men's Shelter and the Summer Shelter are now just the Uptown Men's Shelter. So they can take individuals year-round, and they coordinate between the two because they have different requirements to be in one or the other. But they are all working together.